Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Conscious Marketer podcast. It's Richard here. Hi, Kylie.
Hey.
And today we have a special episode. We're going to talk a little bit about how to move things forward in your business. And specifically, we're going to talk a little bit about, kind of the role of failure. And I know that sometimes we work with a lot of different creators and authors and teachers. And sometimes what stops them in their track is this idea that they may fail in some ways. I'm kind of curious, Kylie, because you've helped so many people. Like, how is this? How have you seen this appear in those that you've worked with?
Absolutely. Procrastination is the first thing because we have a tendency to play the tape forward and have it end in disaster. That's like a survival mechanism that humans have, and it makes sense. It's like our brains are always seeking safety. And if we don't try at all, then we are safe. So I've seen a lot of people try to play it safe. I've also seen when people can work through that resistance is when they are able to get the result. An example is a former client and a dear friend of mine, Paula. I talk about her a lot because her story is so powerful in terms of all of this. English was not her first language, so she was afraid to write copy. And she had an origin story that related to her upbringing with a special needs brother and how that made her feel second because he was getting most of the attention, and it made her feel like she had to be, quote unquote, the good girl, as she would call it. So she felt like it was really important in her origin story, but she was so afraid to tell it. And so we got together and we discussed like what's important to put in this story and what's not. What can you leave out and what feels really, really true and real and necessary. And when she finally, even though English was not her first language, when she finally wrote it out and put it up, she made a $10,000 sale the very next day. Now, not everybody does that, but I felt like that was a little wink from the universe. But if she wasn't able to get over that fear of failure, that fear of hurting other people, that fear of doing and saying the wrong thing, she would have never been able to make that $10,000 sale. And she started a global movement and she got a TEDx talk in Italy, and she's got women clients from all over the world that she's working with in a vulnerable space of sharing their stories. So that to me is always so powerful because she could have chosen to stay small and stay afraid, and all of these beautiful things would never happen for her.
Yeah, it's a great example because it was through the fear and through the potential failure. And so most of the times we kind of imagine, I love what you said, we imagine what's going to happen and then that thing never happens. And in fact, often either something different happens or, the better thing happens that we really want to have happen. So it's like that part of ourselves that wants to protect us at all costs, but sometimes that really holds us back. I think back to, the agencies, the Conscious Marketer agency. And I think of all the wins, but you never forget the big things that went wrong. And normally there's like some big key lesson. Like we were trying to focus on 2 avatars instead of 1, or we launched at the wrong time of year, or the overall market had changed and we hadn't recognized it, So there's all these lessons that come sometimes posthumously, and you look back and you go, oh, okay, I get it now. But what happens is after a certain number of things that happen to you like that, what happens is you have fewer and fewer missteps because you're kind of like your pre-flight checklist and your during flight checklist gets a lot better, so that you can take off and serve the drinks and land the plane really carefully every time. And then what happens is you keep scaling up too, and your own professionalism and integrity for your business goes. But you just have to kind of get out there and risk it, knowing that you're not going to get it all right. But if you can get like 80 to 90%, maybe even 95%, then good things are going to happen.
Yeah, I love that. I remember an ad I wrote one time, and the headline was, "Have you heard of these famous failures?" And the ad copy was telling the story of Steve Jobs getting fired from Apple and J.K. Rowling getting rejected, I think, 20 times before somebody was interested in Harry Potter. And I think she was a single mother on welfare at that time. And then the third one was Erin Brockovich, who has become one of the most important faces of the environmental movement and really got a lot done in her career as an attorney. And she was working at Kmart when all of this stuff occurred to her that she needed to do. And so I think sometimes it can be helpful also to realize that some of the world's most successful people have failed so many times. They've failed more times than they've succeeded. And all you have to do is succeed one time to make that difference in your business and to make that difference in the world. You know, these folks were constantly failing forward. And that's an expression that I heard one time is like fail forward. And that's really the way to do it, in my opinion. I remember one of my biggest fails was my very first launch. And my friend Mike Hill has this group on Facebook called Internet Marketing Super Friends. Now, that group has kind of all the OGs of marketing, just the people that have been in digital marketing since like 1990 something. And it's maybe something like 28,000 people in that group. And it's the longest standing marketing group. Now, he called me one day and he said, I'm supposed to help you. I don't know why, but I'm supposed to. So I was like, okay. So we created this sort of launch structure of a course. He helped me create the course idea, and it was called Launch Alchemy for Women. And I'd been a launch manager for a long time. So I was teaching those processes that I learned. And Mike made one post in his Facebook group. Now, here's the guy that never makes a post for anybody. And it sent me 500 opt-ins. Now, that doubled my list at that time. I had 500 people on my email list. So he doubled it with one Facebook post. And now I had 500 people going through my webinar series. And I was doing 5 of the same webinar in 2 weeks because I was afraid I would fail. And so I wanted to give people different times to show up and things like that. And he came to all of them. And the first one didn't make a single sale. And he called me and he said, Kylie, you're selling a launch course that hinges on the idea of story. And you didn't tell a single story. You just told them like what to do. And I was like, oh man, he's right. So I was able to pivot. So sometimes failure helps us to pivot in the right direction if we're open to it and we don't crumble into like a mess of feeling bad for ourselves or feeling like we're really stupid or judging ourselves. So I was able to pivot and start to tell those stories. And by the end of those 5 webinars, I had 40 people in my course. But, you know, it was kind of embarrassing because he had stuck his neck out there for me and I failed so miserably, but we're still great friends today. So it's all good. We worked it out.
That was super nice of him. And super courageous of you to just keep going forward. And then, you know, sometimes you got to pivot. You see something that's wrong and you're like, I got to pivot in the middle of the launch. Sometimes we've changed titles in the middle of launches, like stuff you're not supposed to do, you know, but sometimes you do it anyway. I'll share just a quick story that, you know, we had a client that was working with us privately, and she, at some point, she just wasn't listening to anything that we were telling her. And, at some point she kind of bounced out and she said, this isn't for me. And when we kind of did a debrief, I realized that she had like a deep mistrust of just in marketing in general. And I didn't, when we started working with her, I didn't realize this, but when I realized that, because I take really a sense of responsibility when I start to work with somebody to really see if I can, you know, get them results, whatever we have to do. And so it was really a great learning experience for me, because then I was like, oh, okay, she had this mindset or this belief about marketing that was really holding her back. And what came from that was I started to really identify all the different mindsets that somebody might have that might hold them back from marketing. So out of that one client that didn't get the results at that point in time and bounced pretty early after, you know, signing on with us, came this whole theory and this whole base of knowledge that now, you know, we're getting it out to a lot of people. Because if you have a certain mindset that's going to hold you back, then you're going to self-sabotage yourself anyway. So it's just a short example of, you know, one of them, I call them like micro failures. You know, there's like really no like serious damage, but I think there's good failures and there's bad failures. I think a good failure is something like that, where you take it, you learn, you move on, you make your system better, or maybe even you have a groundbreaking idea. You know, like I think in that case, a whole new body of work came out. I think a bad failure is when there are systems you should be using, or there should be mentors you should be working with out there. And you're like, no, I got to do this myself. And you're like, yeah, but like, thousands of people have done this before, or like we've done 300 launches. Like, why don't you follow the system? And you're like, no, I'm good. I'm just gonna like reverse engineer what everybody else is doing. And they kind of miss the subtleties. And then they fail and they're like, this stuff doesn't work. And so that's more I think the negative kind of failure where you really don't learn anything. And there were answers out there. You just maybe too closed. So I think there's good failure and there's a type of failure that kind of comes from maybe a little bit of stubbornness, a little bit of arrogance, or maybe just the inability to ask for help sometimes is a big one, where you can avoid some of your failures. If most of us have people in our networks that will help us, or we can hire somebody, or, buy a book, or there's a lot of different ways you can learn how not to fail, how not to unnecessarily fail. Does that make sense? So I just want to be clear that I'm all for like micro failures where you're trying new stuff, you're doing it and you're learning. But then there's this other category, which is like, yeah, you could just avoid that. You don't need to go through all that pain most of the time.
Yeah, I agree with that so much. And I think too, part of it is you mentioned mentorship. And I think part of where I do succeed is in listening to other people that are getting better results than me and or are more successful or just playing at a bigger scale. There's a recent example I have of that where the trend right now is shorter copy. And I've always been a long form copywriter. And even all throughout the years, people have argued with me about this. And I've been able to lean on the giants and the titans of copywriting who are like, no, 22-page sales letters are better than 2-page sales letters. I mean, the OG said that twice in one episode. The oldest, most successful copywriters that have done billions of dollars in sales will tell you 22-page sales letters convert better. So I've always really leaned into that when people have argued with me. But lately, there have been a couple campaigns where the long copy really gave us that immediate feedback that it wasn't the right thing to do at this time. And so I started playing with shorter copy just for fun and trying to get that same emotional aspect to it that I feel like you can do when you tell a longer story. And I'm like, how am I going to do that in a shorter email? And so I wrote an email a couple of weeks ago that we just sent out, and it was 2 sentences with a button. And I think we got doubled all the way up to 5 times as many opt-ins as we normally would get. Now, if I hadn't heard this from people that are playing with tens of millions of dollars per year as a company, I probably would have said, yeah, right. You don't know what you're talking about. I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing because this is what I've done for 10 years and I'm familiar with it. But part of not failing is listening to people that know more. And I'm really glad that I've been able to do that because I'm actually quite stubborn and stuck in my ways. And I feel like a lot of people in our audience can feel that way too, because we've all learned what we've learned through tough travels. A lot of people in the transformation space have had really hard lives, and they've learned what they've learned about their work through going through a lot of trials. And it feels sometimes like, no, this is what I learned. And I went through all of this, and the stakes were so high and I paid so much, and I don't want to do it any differently. So that can be a failure pattern right there.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, there's so many side roads. And so I think having, I think there's peers that are, maybe in different industries or the same industry, they can help you. And then there are trainings. And then I think the best is, especially with whatever field you're working with, is to have that mentor that's like 3 or 4 levels above you. And you want to surround yourself with all of that if you're really committed to kind of making things go forward. And I think this like fail forward and make it happen and, embrace failure. There's like these like t-shirt slogan, like hat slogans, coffee mug slogans. And I think we've heard it so many times. I think we're kind of blind to it. But I think my feeling is you have to go into the actual energy and really ask yourself, am I really pushing myself to the limit every day where I have some micro failures? And there's a term for this, is eustress. Some of the best examples are like physical examples, but like the way you build muscle is you take the muscle to failure on a rep, or you run a little bit faster or further every time and you just keep building on that. That's a physical example, but there's, I would say, the launch social media example of putting your origin story out there, taking a stand for something, sending an email and having somebody give you some negative feedback. I think if you're not having a lot of micro failures every week or possibly every day, then you just have to ask yourself, how do I engineer that so that I'm growing every week and every day versus like staying with the status quo and playing it safe, because your personality wants to play it safe. Normally, your lower self doesn't want to risk anything. That doesn't want to risk failure, wants to keep you safe, which is fine. That's good in certain cases. But if you want to grow your business, if you want to make a bigger impact in the world, then I really think that this is something that you can kind of take in, but feel the energy, not the t-shirt slogan, because the t-shirt slogan doesn't do you any good.
That's funny. Yeah, I love the idea of eustress. I think Wim Hof talks about it in his book about taking cold showers, which has been something that I've been really excited about. And since this episode is probably
You're crazy. Cold showers. No, I agree. I like
6 minutes
them too.
this morning and a cold plunge on Saturday. I found this place down the street that has cold plunges, and I'm so excited. I kind of love, hate it. And I think that that's also what we're getting at here is you may not love stretching yourself in that way, but it's super important in this idea of eustress. Yes, I use it in cold showers. And since we're publishing this so close to New Year's, I will tell you, I'm spending my New Year's Day jumping in the freezing cold Atlantic Ocean, 38 degrees with 2 special agents. So I'm quite excited about that. But anyways, yeah, I agree so much with what you're saying. And I need to pause because I forgot what I was going to say. I had something. Eustress. What was the last thing you talked about?
Just, are you failing every day, pushing yourself every week? Is it like you're just keeping yourself safe all the time?
Safety. I think it related to that. I just went completely blank. Oh, yes. Okay. In terms of safety, our brains are wired for safety. This has been 100 million evolution with our brain. This is neuroscience. We're always scanning our environment for what is safe, what is not safe, what is safe, what is not safe. And one thing that I have been doing with my clients for a really long time is helping them to see what the end is. So keeping the end in mind and then looking at the beginning and the middle from that perspective. So oftentimes we are too afraid to step out on a limb for our own self, and we can withstand a lot of discomfort of staying the same. But when we start to think of all the people that we're really here to help and how they're not getting that help, and how even if they could maybe get that help from someone else, they're not getting it in the same way, and they're really meant to work with you. Sometimes when we really, really focus on what is that end game that we have, why are we in business in the first place, it can pull us through those times of anxiety and those times of fear and that times of gapping out and not wanting to do it. And like Richard said, go through your stress a little tiny bit at a time. What's it going to be? Maybe today it's, I don't want to make a social media post. I'm afraid I'm going to get rejected. Richard talked about, negative comments and stuff like that. We deal with it regularly on our ads and things like that. But can you just take that one thing you're afraid to do and just do that one thing? And then that freaks you out a little bit. And it's like that idea of bringing your muscle to failure, which happens really easily for me because I'm really trying to get strong, but I'm not. And then the next day you're like, okay, I got uncomfortable. So what's next? Okay, well, I'm going to consider ways to build my email list, and I'm going to make a lead magnet, and I'm going to do a launch. And then you're doing launches in your sleep, and then maybe they fail, but then you're like, okay, this is what I need to do differently. And suddenly you're at that 1% of your industry where you're really you've made a name for yourself, and you're doing all the things you ever dreamed of doing that you never thought was possible. So it starts with overcoming one little tiny piece of that fear of failure and then building from there.
Yeah. And it's definitely a philosophy. And I know, Kylie, you like to use the word, I'm curious, a lot. And I love that. But the question you could ask yourself, I'm curious, what would happen if I did 3 more reps? Or I'm curious, what would happen if I posted this, or if I posted twice a week instead of once a week, or emailed twice a day, so you have to start to think, I'm curious, and you start to generate ideas. And I would just say that it's really an attitude on how you approach life and how you approach your business too. And you can bring, as you start to move it into one area, what happens is I think all areas of your life start to expand a little bit, because it's an expansive mindset. And it's a little counterintuitive to what would help you to grow, right? Because you would think keeping it safe and procrastinating and not doing things might keep you safer and more protected, but actually it's kind of the reverse, because other people are developing greater and greater abilities as they overcome whatever they're doing.
Absolutely. So I'm curious. I didn't even know I said that. That's so funny. Yeah, I'm curious what you feel like you need to accomplish and where you're afraid to fail. I just recommend that you write that down. Here's what I want to accomplish. Here's where I'm afraid to fail, and break that failure up into like 5 or 6 items. If you're afraid to go online at all, then what are the 5 things that you need to do to go online, and just do one of them at a time. Maybe it's, I have to write a post. I have to take a picture of myself. I have to pick a social media platform. I have to start a social media platform. Or if it's something further down along the line, maybe it's, I have to commit to a certain offer. I want to sell 15 different things, but I've got to commit to this one offer. And then I've got to put together a webinar, and then I've got to name the webinar, and then I've got to write follow-up emails. But could you just do that one step at a time and break it up? And that way, when you finish one small task, you get that dopamine hit. That's like scientifically proven. And then it gives you that excitement to move on to the next one. And soon it actually feels really good to do hard things. Like, it's exciting. It's fun. It's a challenge.
That's awesome, Kylie. That's such great advice. Well, thanks everybody for joining us here on the Conscious Marketer podcast. You can get the show notes for this podcast at consciousmarketer.com/podcast. And we have a couple programs that you can work with us if you so desire. And you can go to consciousmarketer.com/accelerator. That's our base program where you're with Kylie and I on a weekly basis. We rotate weeks for over 3 months. It's a wonderful program to get your work in the world. Or if you've already started to launch, it can really dial your work in for you. Thanks, Kylie, for a great episode. And thanks everybody for joining us here today on the Conscious Marketer podcast. Bye for now.